Joel, you published an open letter really pleading with Israeli leaders to evacuate Christian Palestinians out of Gaza. What sparked the letter?
Well, Billy, thank you for drawing attention to this. It's a terrible situation, as you can imagine. I mean, everybody in Gaza wants to be out of Gaza right now, but there's a difference. The Israeli government for the last month, 5 weeks, has been urging Palestinians in the northern part of Gaza to move south, right? The Israeli Defense Forces have been opening up secure lanes for people to evacuate to get to the south, and have been helping the international community bring in food, clean water, right, medical supplies, and so forth. So that's all good. The problem is for the Palestinian Christians. There's only about 1,000 Christians left in all of the Gaza Strip out of 2.2 million people. But
Wow.
the 1,000 have been pretty much sheltering in one of three different churches: a Roman Catholic church, a Greek Orthodox church, and another church. I believe it's Baptist. And the long story short of it is that they've been safe there, but very little food, very little water, no medical supplies, and they can't go anywhere because there's so much bombing and shooting in both directions, in either direction. So but starting in the last 24 hours, the IDF has been ordering the Palestinian Christians to say, okay, now you really do have to move south because there's so many more operations we have to do. Well, the problem is I started getting calls from people who are connected to these Palestinian Christians, and they're saying, listen, they're terrified to go south because they're not Muslims, they're Christians, and the Hamas and Islamic Jihad and other violent, genocidal Islamist extremists are going to slaughter these Christians. They're going to rape the wives and the daughters, just like they've done in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, anywhere else where these guys operate. So no, it's not a good idea to move them south. And so then the question is, well, then what? Right. And so I'm saying, trying to get the attention of the Israeli government at the highest levels. And I'm not saying that mine is the only way you could do it, but one way is to get all of the Palestinians and evacuate them by the Israeli military into the West Bank, get the Christians out of Gaza into the West Bank. That's what they've done in the past. And that is a way to at least get them to safety.
You have a lot of connections, obviously, in government, in Israel. You wrote this letter. Have you heard from anybody in power? Have you communicated with any government officials about your pleadings here?
Yeah, I have, Billy, and I appreciate that. And even before my letter got published, I was already communicating with senior officials, and that is just one of the blessings of not only being an Israeli citizen, but in being an evangelical leader who has known some of these folks for many, many years and building those relationships. And honestly, the power of prayer. So doors haven't opened, and I've had a lot of conversations. I don't want to get too far. I don't want to speak about it specifically, but I can say that the warning that Israel could inadvertently, by trying to do something right, moving the Christians south, could inadvertently set into motion a genocide of the Christians. That is now being heard at the highest levels, and so we need to pray that they figure out, okay, good point. Now, what do we do about that?
Yeah, and that's a huge prayer point, right? Because what you just mentioned, you have 1,000 people, which it's a lot of people, but it's a movable amount of people. You could do this in an orderly way. I know some critics, and I want to just throw this out there, they might say, well, what happens if some bad actors somehow slip into those 1,000 and you're letting people in? You're going to hear these sorts of arguments about how do you orderly, do this? Do you have any thoughts on that or any reactions to that sort of critique?
I have a lot of confidence that the Israeli government knows the identity of every single person in Gaza. Let's be honest, this has been a problem for a long time. And more importantly, almost, or at least as important, the Palestinian Christian leadership, not just evangelical, but Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox, Syrian Orthodox, whatever, in the West Bank, they know who the Christians are. So again, 1,000 people is not that many. And so you can certainly vet these people. And if you have any doubts about some of them, okay, put them in a temporary custody until you can fully evaluate whether, who they are and could they potentially be a threat. So yeah, that's a risk, but it's not a risk that is insurmountable.
For these Christians, right now, obviously the intensity of telling them go south, right? It's well intentioned. Hey, go south so we don't harm you in the middle of this military operation. I understand that the threats there. What were their lives like before? What was it like being, a Christian before obviously there have always been issues, but before this latest iteration of the Hamas attack, what were their lives like in that region?
Extraordinarily difficult. I mean, I know many Palestinian Christians who were born and raised in Gaza who do now live in the West Bank or in the United States or elsewhere, and have built friendships with them and have gotten to hear their stories over the years. We do know Palestinian Christians who are in Gaza right now. We, as Israelis, don't have direct access to them, and we certainly don't want to endanger them in any way. But no, it's been a hellish situation, and it long predated this war. Remember, it's just been wars like this over and over and over again. This is the biggest and the worst. But there's been, I think, 6 rounds of fighting between Israel and Hamas in the 15 years since Israel pulled completely out of the Gaza Strip and it became entirely run by the Palestinians. I mean, think about this, Billy. It could be a Palestinian paradise, but Hamas took over. Admittedly, they were elected by the Palestinian people of Gaza and turned the place into a hellhole. I mean, it was bad before that too, but it's gotten much, much worse. And many Christians have died. The few that have been able to immigrate have done it. But now you've got a situation in which Hamas is looking for people to slaughter, and
right.
I don't see any other way.
That's the differentiator here. And if you're sending a group of them to one place, right? Now, just so we understand timelines here, they're hunkering down. They've been in these churches. They've been sort of hiding out, but they've been told they have to move. Do you know how much time they have, how much time you have, and we have to be praying that there's an orderly evacuation, not south, but out of the current place they are?
Yeah, well, we woke up, my wife and I, to text messages sort of bombarding us from multiple directions of people who know the situation, are in touch with the Christians in Gaza, and said, look, they've gotten this word now. They have 5 days. So if that started this morning or late last night, well, then there's 4 days, at least as you and I discussed this on, for my time, it's, late on Friday night here. So, if there's 4 more days. Now, obviously, Israel's defense forces can adjust. It's an artificial time frame, right? It's not based on a specific that we know of, a specific situation. It's that, again, you need to start moving. You need to start making plans and figure out how to get out. And Israel has been directing people on how to do it. I am encouraged that my call to the Israeli government to rethink this quickly and find a different and better way now has reached the highest levels. Although it's also Shabbat here, so it hasn't reached everybody yet, and some people, it may not have. So we need to keep praying in a very specific and targeted way that everybody, every decision maker that needs to be aware becomes aware in the next 24 hours. Let's say that's my first prayer, and the next prayer is in the next 24 hours that a decision gets made on what is the best way to do it. I mean, again, I don't know. I'm offering a solution. Other people have suggested, well, they should move to the United States or Canada or Europe. My concern with that, Billy, is that requires other governments to make decisions. And right now, I don't think the United States is going to let anybody into the country that they don't know. At least there's a precedent and a history of moving Gazan Christians to the West Bank, same culture, just a few kilometers away, right? And they have friends. They all know each other. So there will be homes to welcome them in. I said, I say in the column on All Israel News, I'm willing to work day and night with our nonprofit Christian, humanitarian relief ministry and others to make sure these families all get cared for in however long it takes. And then, later maybe there's a discussion of, do they want to move to Europe or Canada or the United States, and is that even possible? But that's a longer term conversation that I think it's not worth having at the moment. We've got to move them someplace. Other people have suggested that Israel should create an enclave for them in southern Gaza. I don't know if that's really feasible at this point because Hamas still has a lot of firepower. And unless you're planning to build an Israeli military camp around the Christians, and then what do they do? Right? I think they have to be removed from any contact with Hamas, right? Not that there aren't Hamas people in the West Bank, but a lot of them are getting arrested right now. But if you create a camp in which the IDF protects these people, now they're all seen as collaborators, right? So it's a no-win situation, except God is powerful and God is merciful, and he tells us as Christians to care for our brothers and sisters and come and help them in any possible way. And I don't want to see what happened. I don't want to see Christians in Gaza experience the butchery that Jews experienced on October 7th, or that Christians in Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere have experienced.
Yeah. And you look at Nigeria, what's happening there. I mean, these issues are profound and they're horrific. And, I want to just, before we go, I want to mention something because I have found it very interesting and also troubling to watch the narratives unfold. There are certain people saying that Israel is the aggressor. Israel is the one that and this is obviously a very loaded, big issue here. But what are you seeing on the ground? Because we're talking about civilian pauses to allow civilians to. There are all sorts of things that Israel has done that aren't common in war to try to minimize civilian casualties. And so I'd love for you to speak to that for a moment, because I think there are some forces in the world putting out a narrative that maybe is not accurate to what you're seeing or experiencing there.
Well, it's definitely not accurate. And some are doing it because they just don't know the situation. Others are doing it maliciously to say that Israel is committing war crimes. It's just the opposite. So first point, in 2005, the Israeli government made a decision to pull all Israeli soldiers and all Israeli civilians out of Gaza. So we don't occupy Gaza. We didn't. I mean, now it's a different situation, but we didn't occupy Gaza for the last 15 years, almost 17, 18 years. So that's a big deal, because it goes against the whole Hamas narrative that they have to kill people and slaughter people and behead babies and burn them alive because we're occupying them. We're not. So we weren't. So that's number one. Number two, Israel has done more than any military that I've ever heard of or read about in history to protect innocent civilians. That's the policy of the Israeli government, to protect civilians while we have to fight the very genocidal enemy of Hamas and Islamic Jihad that is embedding themselves and hiding behind the innocent civilians. And so it's the Hamas policy to slaughter Jewish and Christian civilians without any warning, and it's Israel's policy to protect those. So that's important. The fact that Israel literally phone calls every single apartment in an apartment building and says, okay, listen, you've got Hamas terrorists on your roof or, in your basement. We have to come deal with that. But you have, 2 hours or whatever, get out. Sometimes the Israeli government will fire like small rockets, but it's called door knocking is the term, but it doesn't have explosive in it. It just rocks the building as a reminder, the time is running out. You have to get out of this building because we're coming. So that, plus Israel's been dumping hundreds of thousands of leaflets in Arabic explaining why to get out and where to go and the routes to get there, and that there's food and water and medical supplies when you get there. I don't think the United States did that in Fallujah or Mosul or Baghdad. I don't think we did it in Kabul or anywhere in Afghanistan. I mean, that is just not the way modern warfare happens, and certainly it's not what the United States did in Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Let's keep things in context here. This is a genocidal war, but we are not dropping a nuclear weapon on Gaza. We're not flattening it. We are dealing with an enemy that is hell-bent on wiping us out, and we are trying to defeat that enemy while protecting the Palestinian civilians. And I think I'm very proud of my government. I'm not saying they've done everything right, but they've done a very, very good job. And it's slander, malicious, wicked slander being spoken against us.
Well, yeah. And I think, being able to sort of explain that, because some of the narratives are clearly not accurate. And one place people can go, obviously, CBN News, we've been covering this intensely, but also allisrael.com, All Israel News, which is your outlet. They can read your letter there. They can see the constant content that you're putting up there as well. Joel, appreciate, as always, you taking the time today to come on with us.
Billy, thank you so much for moving quickly on this story. It's an important story, and it's one that's unfortunately, like my political thrillers, there's always a ticking time bomb, right? There's a clock that's running, and there's like existential danger to Palestinian Christians right now. Let us be their voice, because they're voiceless right now, and they need us to intercede for them.
Well, and I appreciate the prayer points too. People need to be praying for this situation, for Israeli officials, and for really everybody involved, but in particular, those Christians right now who I would imagine are afraid and worrying about what's going to happen in the next few days. Joel, appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Billy. God bless you guys.